Don't wait till the battle's over. Wait. Don't wait till the struggle ends. Shout now. Shout now. Right now. Shout now. Shout now. Don't wait till you make it.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Phillip Show. I hope you're having a great day. Grab your coffee. Oh my God, that's hot. Wait, I wasn't ready. It was hot. So I'm super excited today about the show because I don't know if you guys really kind of pay attention to the scenery that we have here, but I have some books behind me. And it's part of my set, but it's also part of my reading list. Boom! Look at this. Well, can you see it? Let me see. There's lights here, so you probably can't see it. So the author of this book is here today. It's called Sadness is a White Bird. So I'm going to kind of get out of the way. Let's do a brief introduction, and I want him to tell you all about the book, all of what's going on. I'll be asking some questions, but I wanted you guys to know that this is not just a prop. It's actually a book, and it was written by an author, and his name is Moriel Rothman-Zecher, and he was born in Jerusalem. He's the author of the novel Sadness is a White Bird, for which he received the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 honor, and which was a finalist for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, the winner of the Ohioana Book Award, a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award, the winner of the Cincinnati Books by the Banks Author Award, and longlisted for the Center for Fiction's first novel prize. His essays and poems have been featured in over 8 publications, and he's received numerous fellowships and scholarships for his talents. He is also, listen, I feel like very underlived here. He is also a appraised editor and has been characterized by New York Times bestselling author Ayelet Waldman as not only a brilliant writer, he's the finest editor I have had the privilege of working with. He's simply wonderful. Living in Yellow Springs, Ohio with his family. Please help me welcome to the show, Moriel Rothman-Zecher.
Hi, Phillip.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Oh my gosh, thank you for giving me something to have to say. Wow. Wow.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I feel like sometimes my two selves, kind of my writer self and my day-to-day self, like stay far apart from one another.
Oh, really?
Sometimes I feel like sometimes in Yellow Springs I'm just a person in Yellow Springs, which is as it should be. I mean, I don't think I want to walk around all the time and being like, "Hi, good morning, I'm a writer."
Right.
But it's nice to get to talk to a fellow Yellow Springer about my novel and about the fiction, and about the work. So thank you. Thanks again for having me on here.
Absolutely, and I totally understand what you mean about running around, because you don't run around with your resume on your neck like, hey, and by the way, I'm great if you didn't know.
Right. And that's something I like about Yellow Springs, is that you kind of just you walk around the coffee shop and you're like, oh, like, hey, those folks were just talking with Barack and Michelle Obama about their movie, but like we're also just getting coffee next to each other.
Right. No, totally. So let's jump into your book. Sadness is a White Bird. It's being received incredibly well. What is this story? What is this journey all about?
Yeah. So I guess to talk about the book, I'll tell you a bit about myself. I'll talk a little
Absolutely.
bit about my actual autobiography, and then talk about the ways in which the book is not an autobiography. So I was, as you mentioned, I was born in Jerusalem, but raised mostly in Yellow Springs. Lived, parts of the end of my high school back in a northern town in Israel, but then decided to go back to the States for college. And during that period, my politics, my identity began to shift quite dramatically, particularly around Israel's first war on Gaza in 2008, 2009. And that had a sort of a pretty dramatic and jarring effect on me, where for a long time, I'd imagined that when I turned 18, or maybe when I turned 22, I'd do my mandatory service in the Israeli military and probably join a combat unit. And then if I joined a combat unit, I'd probably be stationed in the West Bank. And that started to shift and started to sort of those ideologies, some of what was propping them up started to crumble as I kind of looked at the realities on the ground. And understood more about the situation in the occupied territories and what it is that the Israeli army does on a day-to-day basis. So fast forwarding a lot, and we can circle back to this if we get to it. But fast forwarding a lot, I did eventually move back to Jerusalem in after finishing college when I was 22, and I did get my military draft notice. But by that point, my sort of politics and ideologies had shifted enough that I decided to refuse to enlist. So I was a conscientious objector, not recognized officially. I ended up spending a few weeks in military jail and then getting a sort of pro forma mental health exemption, which is, I think, what folks do when they want to get out.
Yeah.
And after that, I kind of had this whole period of sort of trying to find my footing, trying to find my balance, trying to figure out what I wanted to do next in the world after this kind of dramatic but really fairly brief event. I'd been thinking about it for 10 years, for 15 years maybe, and then I refused, and I was jailed for a short time, and then I was out 3 weeks later, and then there was kind of this chasm around me, this empty space, and I was like, well, how do I fill it? How do I use my time? What do I do with my days? I just started dating this woman named Kayla, who now we're married and have a 3.5-year-old daughter and live here in Yellow Springs together. And she, at some point she was like, well, why don't you write a book? And I was like, okay, yeah, well, of course I've always wanted to do that, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm ready. I'm not sure this, that. I don't know how to write. Like, at that point I'd written, blog posts and some op-eds and some essays and some poems, but nothing long, nothing sort of continuous like that.
Sure.
And I remember I had this dinner. It was a dinner out in California. Kayla was doing a legal fellowship in California. She was working in refugee and human rights law, and she was doing a legal internship in California. And we had dinner. It was a Friday night dinner, and I remember I was talking to this woman, and she said, "Hi, nice to meet you. I'm a painter." And I go, "Well, cool. That's nice. Like, what does that mean?" And she said, "Well, for me, it means that I paint every day." And I kind of heard that and thought for a second, and I was like, right, but what if you don't have anything to paint on a given day? What if you come up to your canvas and nothing is flowing and nothing is moving and nothing is coming out of your paintbrush? And she looked at me, and I remember in this very kind of calm delivery, she said, then I stare at the canvas for an hour and a half, and that counts.
Oh, wow, that counts.
Yeah, and I love that. And for me, that was this moment of like, oh, I could do that. Not as a painter, obviously, because I'm not a painter.
Like, I could stare at something for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. But like, say, imagining that my canvas would be a page and that my paintbrush would be a pen or a keyboard. And so I was like, I don't know that I could write something worthwhile every day or really any day, but I'm pretty sure that I have the sort of self-discipline to force myself to sit in front of a computer for, and a blank page on a computer, not just sort of scrolling the New York Times or Twitter, but internet off, blank page open for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And that was really the moment that I sort of consider this shift from when I called myself someone who writes to when I called myself a writer.
Was that almost kind of giving you permission to see the active part of writing as also not doing, but just in that creative space, even if it doesn't involve physical writing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect framing for it. That just getting this external permission that like you can choose to sort of to be an artist based on how you spend your time and not based on what you produce, right? Being an artist in this framing, what I love so much, it's how you choose to shape your days and not, what comes out on the canvas in the end or what comes out on the page in the end. Because I think in a lot of ways, the way I kind of understand art is that part, the part that comes out on the page or that comes out on the canvas, isn't totally up to my conscious brain.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it actually works best when my conscious brain can step out of the way for a while. And obviously later on I come back and I edit and I make the, gibberish make sense and I make the, rambles have some sort of logic or coherence. But I think especially those early drafts, and if I can again continue the metaphor perhaps further than is fair, but putting that first layer of oil paint down on canvas, it's not always going to be like I consciously think that the red would go perfectly with the blue right under there. It's a lot more sense-based and feeling-based and kind of rhythm-based, and a lot less kind of analytical and I don't know if it's front brain or left brain or right brain or whatever part of the brain it is that.
Yeah, it seems to be a little bit more experiential.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I consider that it was kind of this moment of permission, this moment of saying, I think I could do that too. And so I sat down and I started writing pretty much every day. I took weekends off, and I still take weekends off. And what I ended up writing then was kind of a rehashing of the past 7 years, right? So sort of stories about political activism, stories about refusing to serve in the military, maybe some poems and reflections. And I found a literary agent who was interested in working with me, and got to the point where we were probably a few weeks away from sending off a book proposal. And I had this kind of moment of reckoning where I was like, I actually don't believe in this book.
Oh.
Not because I didn't believe in the individual parts, but because it felt like a recycling project rather than a project of full creation. It felt like I was shuffling parts around from things I'd already written, things I'd already said, things I'd already touched on, things I'd already put in print form, and kind of like shuffling it around and moving it around. And I had this moment where I was like, oh, if I can say that out loud to myself, that I'm kind of bored by this project, then how dare I try to put a book like that out in the world, right? There are a lot of books in the world, and that's a good thing. And I love books so much. But I think for me, one of the main tests of whether or not a book should be in the world is whether the author is bored by it or not. If the author is bored by the book shouldn't exist. And you can't always tell, but
yeah.
I mean, I think most authors aren't gonna, after it's published, aren't gonna admit I'm bored by this book. But yeah. I knew that, right? I came face to face with this kind of realization that I was bored by this book before it even became a book. And so then Kayla asked me, she's like, well, what do you want to write? Because clearly you like this whole writing thing. And I said, I had this moment where I was like, well, I think I want to write the story of what didn't happen, but what easily could have.
Okay.
What didn't happen, but what I could easily imagine having happened in my own life. And specifically, I wanted to take a character, sort of a young American Israeli who spoke Hebrew and had family in Israel, but also was learning Arabic and wanted to be connected to Palestinians and sort of understand Palestinian history and Palestinian poetry. And to sort of take a character like that who might resemble me on the sort of autobiographical level.
I was about to ask, is that you?
Yeah, so that part was me, but then to shift him dramatically and to make him enlist when I didn't, right? To sort of make him go through with this decision at age 18 to become a combat soldier, to be stationed in the West Bank, even though we shared so much of this sort of this background.
Yeah.
And in this process of sort of making up a character and following him rather than trying to write some kind of sketch of myself was exhilarating. It was thrilling, and I loved getting to be in this world where he was a character who I cared about deeply, but he wasn't me. And I think in that way I was maybe able to look more honestly both at his beautiful elements and at his failures, right? At the parts in him that I really admire and the parts in him I see as hypocritical, and to sort of write maybe a truer portrait of a person than I would have if I'd tried to write an autobiography.
Yeah.
And
is it easier writing about somebody you pseudo know than it is to write about yourself?
So I think I'd almost answer in two parts. I think that it's easier to write about myself on a surface level Because I know all the details, all the sort of like facts, and and I can tell you, like, I think I like to think about fictional characters like I like to think that an author should know their fictional character so well that that she knows whether or not the character like likes pickles or what she has in her right pocket on a given Tuesday. Okay. Even if pickles and pockets never come into the story. And I can, on a factual level, I can tell you that I do like pickles, and I have a hole in my left pocket. But I think that the second part of the story, and on the deeper level, I think I've found that I'm able to write more truthfully, more honestly about a fictional character than I am about myself. But because I think on both levels, I think that I often have a skewed view of myself as either, right, too good or too flawed, right? Yeah. Like too righteous or too failed. And I think these are kind of the prisms, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but with which a lot of us see ourselves, right? Either kind of fluctuating back and forth between like, I'm the hero or I'm the villain, right? I'm the protagonist or I'm the bad guy. Like I'm worthy and wonderful, or I am dust and ashes. Yeah. And both of those are probably exaggerated portraits of most people. Yeah. And I think that for me, what I've found in writing fictional characters is I'm able to push away both of those extreme voices, right? My fictional characters are neither these kind of perfect heroes nor these like flawed devils. And it is important to me in writing fiction that even the characters in the book who are kind of, I guess you could say, the antagonists or the anti-heroes, that they are never dehumanized, right? They're never made to be kind of like cheap villains. And specifically in this book, in this novel, Jonathan's grandfather has sort of a very different political take and political worldview, and is coming much from the far right wing of Israeli society. But it was really important for me in this project not to sort of use him as a foil or use him as a kind of thing to bounce Jonathan off of, but rather to like go deeply into his life and deeply into his heart, and and demonstrate how it was he wound up with these sort of militaristic, nationalistic points of view, without trying to reach a point, right? Without trying to make an argument, but just to sort of show this character, this made-up character, as he really is. Something like that.
After writing the book, well, did you like the book when you were done?
That's an awesome question. I love that. So there are a few stages to that question too. So I finished the first draft in, quickly, like probably 2.5 months. I had 400 pages. I sent it back to this agent, and so when I called her to tell her I was writing a novel instead of this nonfiction project, she kind of like paused and was like, have you ever published any work of fiction ever? And I was like, no, I have not. She was like, all right, well, call me when you have a draft, I guess. Probably thinking like, all right, see you later, kid. Like, I'll never hear from this guy again. Too bad about those wasted hours. But she did hear from me again, right? I did have a finished draft very quickly. And, then I didn't hear from her for a month, for 2 months, or 3 months, finally heard back. And her name is Julia Cardin, and she's still my literary agent today. So I'm giving a spoiler to this story, but she wrote, listen, you're a good writer. There are some beautiful parts to this story. And if you could rewrite the whole thing, then I think we have something to work with.
Get out of here.
So I was like, rewrite the whole thing. And then I spent a week weeping and feeling sorry for myself. And then realizing that she was right. That I'd done a really good job sketching, right? That the first draft was a good sketch. It contained some interesting moments and some compelling characters, and was so far from being where it needed to be. So to answer your question, I think if you'd asked me whether I liked that first draft, I think my answer would have been, I hope so. Like, I don't know, I think so. Maybe someone else should like it and tell me that it's good and this and that. And I was fortunate to have to have an agent who told me there is a lot of potential to this thing, and if you can put in the work to do the whole thing over. And I ended up doing 3 more sort of full major redrafts until it got to a point where, a full year later, where Julia and I were like, okay, like this is where the book needs to be. Like, let's send it out. And by that point, by that year and a half after I started writing, when I had my 4th draft in hand, I think I can say I did like the book, and I did like where it ended up. Even on the level of, I liked the characters, right? And there's a sense in which I miss them today.
Okay.
Right? I don't spend every day with them anymore.
You formed a relationship.
Especially with the 3 main characters.
Yeah.
Jonathan and Laith and Nimreen. I feel like I grew really connected to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is, it's certainly not the only measurement of a novel, but it's one of the things I look for most when I read, right? Are there characters who I'll be thinking about a lot in the months that follow?
Mm.
So on that level, obviously I can never read my book as a true reader, but the characters that I invented were characters who I liked a lot. And so I think by the time it finally was sent out to publishers and then accepted by one publisher, I think I did like the story that had been created.
That's interesting. I guess the time it takes and the emotional aspect of even writing and being so connected to the book. So after you launched the book, what happened?
So we sent it out to publishers, and it was this kind of quick process where Julia sent it out to 13 editors at a bunch of different publishing houses, and 12 said no, and 1 said yes, which was magnificent. And so at that point, then I started to work with an editor at the publishing house, which is Atria, which is imprint of Simon and Schuster, and we worked back and forth for a little under a year, and this was everything. This was copy edits and page formatting, and there's some strange spacing stuff I do in the book where there'll be various points of blank space and white space and lines, and I truly drove the copy editor folks crazy, where I was like, actually, could we have a little bit 2 more lines down? And they're like, that doesn't work. We have to do the whole thing over.
So with that sort of, just to pause right there, what was the purpose of that intentionality for the format?
Yeah. So I think that the formatting and the use of white space in some of the pages, for me, has a lot to do with poetry I've read. The way that I think poetry uses the page as part of the art, right? That sometimes, a novel or work of nonfiction, the page can be incidental, right? It's a page, but for the most part, it's just filled with words.
Sure.
And maybe there'll be paragraph indents here and there, but just a page, words, and then it doesn't matter so much how the page looks.
Right.
What I love about reading poetry is the way the page becomes part of the process, becomes part of the reading experience, in which white space can be asked to stand in for silence, to stand in for pain, to stand in for ignorance, to stand in for a bunch of different things. And using spacing like this in a way of, there's a particular moment. I don't want to give away too much of the detail if folks end up reading it, but there's a particular intense emotional moment about 200 pages into the book, 200 and a bit, I think, where Jonathan receives a phone call, or he makes a phone call, and he hears something that throws him over the edge. And in that moment, I didn't have the words to express it, and I felt like any words would fall short. So instead, in a time in which there's no time is supposed to have elapsed between when he hears this and when he speaks again, but there's almost two full blank pages between the thing Jonathan hears and his response, even though it's a millisecond of time having passed.
So it's like space with a purpose.
Space with a purpose. Yeah. And I think in general, I drew from poetry again and again in writing this novel. I mean, the title is drawn from a poem by the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish. The poet is called "A Soldier Dreams of White Lilies," and the line is, the poet asked, "Did you feel sad?" I asked. Cutting me off, he said, "Mahmoud, my friend, sadness is a white bird that does not come near a battlefield. Soldiers commit a sin when they feel sad." And so that poem, that particular poem by Darwish, is present in the plot of the book. It's present in the text. It's present in the meta text. And in general, I think that poetry for me has been and remains the sort of ultimate source of creative writing, and of creation in the medium of words. I think it's sort of this effort to sort of, I think of a lot of creative writing as translation, right? Even if it's not actually a translation of languages, we're trying to translate what we feel, right? We're trying to translate our emotions and experiences with these approximations, right? Every time, if I say, I love you, it's an approximation of a lot of things, and I'm trying to translate some kind of collection of sentiments or feelings or longings or ideas, and it's always going to fall short. And I think that poetry for me is this effort to sort of chisel down these translations to their ultimate core, right? To like cut off all the extra words and all the extra efforts and kind of get as close as the poet possibly can to an accurate translation.
Wow.
And fiction, I think fiction, what I like about fiction is that it gives you a little more space to sort of try to translate, mess up, try again, scribble some things. Not sure if you got it right, that's okay, on to the next chapter. Try again with the next character, try again in the next page. And I like that. I like the sort of opportunity for error, the opportunity for imperfection that sort of a novel offers. But I always look to poetry as kind of the source of ultimate inspiration.
So for your book, what are you hoping, or what lessons are you hoping, or what are you hoping the takeaway is for the readers who read your book?
That's a really nice question. So I think that another thing I loved about writing fiction is that it released me from the obligation to make an argument. I felt that especially talking about Israel-Palestine, and especially coming from the world of political activism, and it felt like when I was writing nonfiction, I felt like I had to conclude with an argument. I had to conclude with saying, and I've showed you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so you should believe 6, 7, right? Or and I've told you that the situation is ABC, so I want you to go do D. And that's good, right? I think there's a real value in activistic writing and in sort of the world of advocacy and of polemics. But in the novel, I wanted to kind of dive as deeply as I could into some of the same realities and some of the same truths without feeling this obligation to kind of give a reader a takeaway that I didn't know myself, right? That I wasn't sure what could be, what should be the next step or what should be done. I will say that kind of what I was talking about earlier, this idea of like human goblins, that is a very popular way of thinking about the world, right? I think we like to think that like the people who aren't like us or don't think like us are goblins on some level, right? They're not fully human. The people who disagree with me aren't really as human as I am, and they don't have the same kind of like, family connections and sexual desires and like, memories of smoking pot on the beach with their friends and all of these things. Like, I think there's this temptation, a very human temptation to think like the people who are against me in a kind of political sphere aren't as human as I am. And I think that what I hope this book doesn't allow is that. I hope that a reader who comes to this book with, let's say with no familiarity or or sympathy to a Palestinian perspective will leave the book, a little sort of softened in their aggression. But similarly, a reader for whom a right-wing Israeli Jew is nothing but a goblin will come away and say like, oh wow, like actually there were moments where I was like, oh, I resonated with this grandfather, or like, I might not like where he ended up, but I can imagine, an alternative world in which if I were in his shoes, I might have made similar choices. And I think without that act of imagination, right, without the ability to imagine ourselves into every possible set of shoes, especially in a fraught political conflict, but also in general. Without that, I think our sort of moral, ethical, and political life is destined to be narrow and is destined to be broken. And I think that one of the things fiction has offered me is this invitation again and again and again to imagine myself outside of myself, right? Because who cares who I am when I'm reading a book, right? Obviously, I bring a million things to a book, but it doesn't matter on some level, right? Because in the book, I'm kind of asked to suspend myself, at least for parts, and just go with the characters, go with the narrators, follow the world through their eyes, understand the world through their hearts. And then, of course, I'll emerge at the end, and I'll still be me, or I'll still be some version of me, maybe changed a little bit for having read the book. But yeah, so I think that if there's one thing I hope from this book, that it's another push, kind of tapping into the literature I love best, another push to readers to imagine themselves outside of themselves, and just imagine living as a person who otherwise might seem like an enemy.
Who otherwise may seem like an enemy, and that's such a pivotal point. So for the people out there who are now just waiting to get the book, where can they find you?
So my website is my full name with no dashes and spaces and anything, MorielRothman-Zecher.com. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, but I will say that I am on formally, but I haven't really been on since November.
Okay.
And there was something about Donald Trump that I think finally, something about the sort of the intimate connection between Donald Trump and Twitter that finally kind of was like, I need some space away from this thing. Not to say that everyone who uses Twitter becomes like Donald Trump, but just there's something that really grossed me out about how this particular media platform allowed him to become president of our, maybe these particular media platforms. That I think without social media, it's hard for me to imagine that he would have gotten to where he was. And I think there's something about the sort of the social media format that rewards, kind of the ugliest human behavior imaginable. And rewards kind of, it rewards cruelty and rewards narrowness and rewards never trying to imagine yourself outside of your own shoes. And so again, I have these accounts and they exist and folks are welcome to follow, but I'm not sure when I'm getting back on, honestly. It's weird how little I've missed them.
Gotcha.
Since and it could be that I'll find some good reason in the coming months or whatever that I need to.
The best place is on your website.
The best place is probably on my website. I think that's right. I update it regularly. I'll have information about my next novel, which will be coming out in 2022, and also the sort of various poems and smaller projects and essays and whatever that I continue to chip away at.
Well, I'm very glad that you stopped by today and talked to us about this gem and gave us a story behind it, because I think so many times we can make up how and why and where a story was created, but it's so awesome to be able to hear the authentic reasons as to the existence of these words on these pages, how they're formed. You even gave us insight into the space, and it's intentional. So many pieces of creativity go into this. and intentionality. And it's just awesome to know that. It gives it a totally different meaning. And thank you for giving us that insight.
Thank you, Phillip. That's a really beautiful framing. Sometimes it feels, there's always a question when talking about the book of who cares, which I think is a good question, because on some level, once the book is out in the world, it belongs to the world. And as the author, now my perspective on it is just one of many. But I really appreciate framing how having these little insights about how the book came about what the spacing could mean for a reader, and obviously each reader can take it as she wants to take it. I really appreciate that. It's a nice testament to why I really enjoy these conversations, and thank you for having me on this show.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show. Special thanks to Moriel Rothman-Zecher, author of this amazing book, Sadness is a White Bird. Make sure you check out his website so you can get all of the information surrounding him, his services, his talents, as well as his new book, which you mentioned right here, that's going to be coming out in 2022. Listen, we just learned something today. Just because you are not in physical motion doesn't mean that you're not being creative. Being creative also means sitting and listening and giving yourself time and silence to just be. So just remember to exist in that space. It's okay not to be physically active all of the time. I love that permission that he just gave today. So make sure you visit his website. And as usual, remember that you are the best you in the world.
Don't